Drafting from the 101 against the RotoViz OT community. That is what we are doing today, and we have done one of these drafts a couple of weeks ago that we released. We often mention that these are some of the most challenging drafts that we play in at all, because the people who are drafting against us are listening to our shows. They have access to all of Shawn's rankings. Shawn had an article out in the last couple of days talking about the 5 basically most mispriced players at the FFPC in this format. All that information is available to the people drafting against us. So it makes it challenging. They know kind of some of the strategies we want to implement, but they also are some of the most fun and thought-provoking drafts that we take part in. So I'm really excited about this, Shawn. And as luck would have it, we jump in. The draft is randomized by the order. We get the 101. So we kick things off with Jalen Hurts. We'll talk a little bit through our decision in a moment between Hurts and Allen at that pick. I feel those are the two options just slightly ahead of Mahomes. And then we'll see how the rest of the draft wraps around as it gets back to us. We'll have lots of time, Shawn, between picks to talk about those selections. And of course, then, what we're looking to do for the rest of the draft as we discuss the entire draft. This is the $35 Superflex Best Ball tournament over at the FFPC, and it has a $100,000 top prize. That is what we are trying to chase down in this contest. Always one of my favorite advanced structures. Top 2 go through from the league. Top 2 go through in each playoff round. I believe it's 78 teams in the final then for a shot at the top prize, Shawn. So I'm excited to jump in. We've had some good fortune over the years in this format. Hopefully we get to the top of the leaderboard this time around. So as we get ready to draft, how are you feeling at this moment in time?
Good. I'm fired up. These are so much fun, and we get such a great mix. We love the people who draft with us in these rooms. And even something as simple as out of the 4 slot here, the team we have is Pirates could happen to anyone, which many of you will know is a quote from my favorite play, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. Colm, I always feel a little bit bad about getting the 101 in a draft that you've set up, but it is randomized by the FFPC. That wasn't us putting ourselves up top, and it does give us a chance to kind of discuss this from the other side of the board. The last time that we drafted, we were in the back half. There are some specific tactics that you need to apply from there, and sort of a specific overall strategy that you need to apply when you're in the back half, and especially the back third. I've written a lot about that on the site. It is different when you're at the top. You can go with the star QBs. Anyone who wants to jump over to the RotoViz tools and see what some of the recommendations are here, not just by round, but by draft slot, because it does change quite a bit throughout the first round. One of the things that we're seeing here is we get 4 QBs in the first 4 picks. Then you get Christian McCaffrey. Colm, he was someone I was going to float to you as a possible pick even at the 101 and try some 0 QB action. But then once you get into these back of the draft picks, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, they do go at 10 and 11. They are the very strongly recommended picks there, and you're encouraged to go 0 QB from those slots. Every draft is different, and so I would never say that a particular participant is playing it incorrectly because they don't follow what the Roster Construction Explorer or the Best Ball Win Rate Explorer recommends. We're going to get different scoring this season, and we're going to have individual players who break out and win leagues, win tournaments. If you have a strong conviction about one of those players, you should take him and not worry too much about the construction. You need to have that conviction because the constructions work for a reason, right? One of the things that I was interested in here and discussing with you is this idea of, would we break with the recommended structure and take a Jaden Daniels if he comes back to us? He's one of our high priority players. I do think that if you go QB, and he is one of those 2 guys, and then you would also need Hurts or Allen to be one of the 2 guys, that is viable in a way that almost no other QB structures are, or at least interesting, right? It's a play to go big to win the tournament. And in this season, I don't necessarily feel like the picks who are going to come back to us here at the 2-3 at the non-QB positions are overwhelmingly necessary. That's one of the reasons why if you do what Tim and Happy Birthday Achievers have done out of 10 and 11 works so well, because you're getting one of the best running backs and you're getting one of the best wide receivers. Those two teams are set up: Bijan Robinson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Breece Hall, Jamar Chase. That's a fantastic start, and you're set up very well to push QB. I don't know if there's going to be anyone at the 2-3 turn that we feel like we have to have. Now, the flip side of that would be that the elite tight ends will probably go early in this draft, and we are going to like some guys at that position when it gets back around to us.
Yeah, so we have 7 picks to go to. It gets to us. I do think that the one player that would fit what you're talking about there is Daniels, in terms of the profile that he brings and the second quarterback on this roster with the potential upside for it. I feel, we're looking at players heading into next season and how this shakes up. I think he's probably one of those quarterbacks with the season that we're projecting for him would be into that first round conversation. So he's one that I think we may have to discuss if he makes it to us. I've done a couple of these drafts recently, obviously with yourself. I'm doing some with Tom Strack, some with Zachary Kruger in the slow format as they work through. And I've been lucky in those. I had a 103 and a 101 in that format recently. One of those teams, I went with Josh Allen. The other one, we took Mahomes at the 104 spot, the Mahomes pick was. So just changing it up here, we went with the Hurts selection and some of the things that I learned through drafting that Allen team so far that make it a little bit challenging for some of the things we might like to do later, in terms of even some of the similar week 12 buys at quarterback, the likes of a Derek Carr perhaps later on. If you want to push for that second quarterback to be much further down the draft board, can be a little bit challenging at times. So we'll see how it falls when it gets back to us. But Shawn, you mentioned the players that tend to go. Garrett Wilson did go one pick before our pick at the 2-11 in that second draft with Josh Allen. I was a little bit disappointed by that, but the likes of Wilson has gone in the mid-second round here, followed by Nakua, then Sam Laporta. I have found it very tough at those 2-3 turns passing up Sam Laporta and Trey McBride. We even went Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid on that Josh Allen team to shake things up a bit and try and get a little bit different. But with this roster, Shawn, we are likely here to have a conversation unless Daniels goes in this next pick as the option. And then I'm kind of feeling, as we look at the draft board, the one thing I would push here, and I know he's not a prime target for you this year, but AJ Brown would also potentially be here available at this pick. And we'll have back-to-back selections. So I would kind of be, if AJ Brown gets to us, I would be between him, Daniels, and Trey McBride probably for those potential selections. How would you be shaking out that trio? And with it being a Hurts team and AJ Brown kind of 5 picks after ADP, would that play into the conversation for you?
It would, Colm, but he does go 1 pick ahead there. He's also someone who does slide enough to Jalen Hurts. I don't think it would be a unique enough combo to make that a high priority. Let's go ahead and select Jaden Daniels here and go with Trey McBride.
Yeah, I'm good with that. And I understand the part, and I feel like Shawn just doesn't want to draft AJ Brown this year. But the other part of that is when we talk through the entire scenario and how we're trying to get this to play out, the players that are available around this, the one player at wide receiver would have been AJ Brown, who could have potentially got to us. Puka's gone, Garrett Wilson's gone. Other players possibly in the mix you could have a conversation around would be Brock Purdy. But then you're into like Sam Laporta is usually the 301. It's Jonathan Taylor, Travis Kelce, Saquon Barkley, Jared Goff. Marvin Harrison would be the next wide receiver, followed by Drake London. Outside of that, it's all quarterbacks in the 3rd round, barring Trey McBride. So I'm happy to make the play to pull up Trey McBride. And it'll be interesting to see how tight end goes in this draft, Shawn, because through the drafts that I have done, the picks between 1 and 4, you do get a lot of opportunities to pick up on the tight ends that we can like, the likes of a Kyle Pitts. You might get a fallen George Kittle a little bit. Like there's a lot of options, I feel, at this side of the draft, whereas at the back end, you're kind of hoping that Trey McBride or Dalton Kincaid slides to you, at that 3-4 range, or else you're kind of missing out on those guys. So Travis Kelce goes to the Mahomes drafter, who also took Jordan Love in the first 2 rounds. So Shawn, I guess the question is now, we have started off with Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels, and then Trey McBride. So it feels like we're really going to be pushing that QB as far as we can. Is it a case that you're happy go with 2 quarterbacks. I know in the data would show that you're better to have, the 3 probably in this format. How are you feeling about QB now that we have 2 through 2 rounds based on what we have talked about in the past? And one of the things I did try last season quite a bit, and more so the season before, was to go QB, try and get 2 QBs in those first 3 rounds that I really liked, and then built out even some 2 quarterback builds. Some of them did play out quite well, but none of them got into the big prize money as it went along. How do you feel about the quarterback position with the way we have started here? Because we haven't talked a lot about starting off back-to-back quarterbacks in this format.
I think when you start back-to-back, you can go with 2. We went with 2 last year in the team that made the finals, with the second one being Sam Howell. Now, obviously, we ran into some trouble there in the finals. When you start with the 2 QBs, you've invested so much in it that you've got to pull a lot back at the rest of the positions, which means waiting for a long time on the QB3, the QB4. I do think that there are interesting picks very, very late. I think that more QBs should probably be going than are. You have some additional backups who should be filtering in here a little bit, like a Trey Lance. So we'll be looking around 17, 18, 19, 20 to put some additional QB firepower in there, build out the depth a little bit. But certainly, unless we get some type of a crazy faller, which is always possible in this room. Now, one of the things is that the evidence is so clear about waiting at QB that I'm a little bit surprised that we have 4 different drafters start QB, but we were obviously one of them. It is a situation where I think that after Jaden Daniels, the value sort of falls off a cliff. Now, in this format, in a regular room, you're going to have Daniels go at the 2-3 turn. Purdy has already gone. And then in the middle of 3, you get Jared Goff, Trevor Lawrence, Caleb Williams, and Tua. Those guys are all very strong selections for a normal format. They're going to be in that QB window. When you are pairing them up with their receivers and in many cases game stacking them, you have built out the perfect type of structure where you have the receivers you need early, you're playing some 0 RB in there, you're getting some elite tight ends, and then they round the roster out extremely well. It doesn't work for you quite as well in Superflex, or it hasn't, right? That doesn't mean, and again, in terms of putting that strategy session together, one thing we do talk about a little bit is you could always get a season where QB health is sort of an outlier to the healthy side, in which case these more QB heavy teams are going to have better results. But looking at that, I mean, Caleb Williams is probably the other quarterback there who really launches a team if things hit properly. He is the next QB that goes in this particular draft, going there at the 306. I like that play. Brock Purdy falls to the 310. Once you're getting him a full round below ADP this early in the draft, you have to like that selection. But I think that we're set pretty well with the 2 QBs, at least kind of taking that risk. Now, one of the things that we have here is 2 hybrid QBs. There are lots of debates about how risky that is from a health perspective. I do think that we've gotten a little bit lucky that Hurts has stayed relatively healthy. Now, he has been dinged up a little bit, which has knocked down his performance in a couple of games in which he played. But he stayed relatively healthy. Obviously, there's a lot of concern with Jaden Daniels because he's a slender fellow who takes a lot of big hits. I don't know that we need to be worried about the overall when you consider that someone like Lamar Jackson, who, I mean, one of the things about Jackson is he doesn't let himself get hit, and yet he's suffered several meaningful injuries over the last couple of years. Anthony Richardson, a behemoth, and yet he also has had serious trouble with injury. Jaden Daniels could get hurt, and that's going to be one of the things that torpedoes this team. Colm, let's go back to the idea of taking Jalen Hurts right off the bat. One of the things that I'm looking at there is that there is a clear top tier in terms of what the newly updated range of outcomes tool. Anybody who hasn't been over there yet, Dave has a fantastic display with that. You can check that out. These 2 guys really stand out. Now, Lamar Jackson also has a good projection. He goes at the 105 in this room. But in terms of breaking down the selection before the draft, working through it, Hurts and Allen, similar numbers in terms of expected points, similar numbers in terms of fantasy points over expectation over the last couple of years. Hurts has a higher rushing EP, and I think that even though Allen has been better at outperforming there, that part is interesting because even if Hurts drops down some in terms of the tush-push opportunities with the retirement of Kelsey, he's still going to score a lot of rushing points in their passing expected points, where he has floundered a little bit. I like his chances a lot better than a Josh Allen when you consider that he has A.J. Brown, he has Devontae Smith. They haven't had a very healthy Dallas Goedert over the past several seasons, but they could have that. The Bills are really moving in the opposite direction, even to the point where the Eagles added Johnny Wilson late in the draft, a player who was much better from a per route performance perspective than the guy who's supposedly going to fill in for Stephon Diggs and Keon Coleman, right? They were in the same college team, and Wilson was better. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be better at the NFL level, but it's an interesting note there in terms of what Hurts has to deal with versus what Allen has to deal with, and the fact that the Bills have sort of signaled that they don't plan to be as aggressive offensively. Now, I will note that Allen's performance, unlike someone like a Stephon Diggs, for example, was identical to even slightly better post-offensive coordinator change last year. But when I'm looking at all of the things, it's easy to see how that could be a little bit fluky. And then when you don't have Stephon Diggs, could continue to decline. And then the thing that you noted, I think that the playoff situation for Jalen Hurts is a lot better having the Dallas Cowboys in a potential shootout. We know they've got some defensive stars, but we also saw what happened to them against the Green Bay Packers in the playoffs last year. I think that's a much tougher matchup than the New York Jets and their defensive coordinator and their studs on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and I'm just looking, Shawn, as the draft board is going along, and we mentioned at the start, I did, the challenges of this draft. That also poses, some players being potential fallen values in this draft. And Brock Purdy did go at the 311, which is, round after normal, but it's a Breece Hall, Jamar Chase, Brock Purdy team. But Shawn, not only did Brock Purdy go around after, they also got Jonathan Taylor around after, who, that's a pretty impressive kickoff to that particular draft that they have gone with. So we'll see how some of these teams play out throughout the entirety of it. But you also said about, the number of teams. There's 4 teams who've started off QB. Part of that, I think, also is, there is, and where those guys have actually gone, there isn't that much of a dip in value at that particular point of the draft. But maybe some of their thinking that the draft may be also a little bit different and, getting a little bit different against the grain there. But we are now a couple of picks away. Malik Neighbors was a player I was going to discuss as a potential option. He's after going off the board. Jalen Waddle's after going off the board. We are in a situation now where we do see Trevor Lawrence and Justin Herbert kind of fall here a little bit. By ADP, some of the kind of priority targets could be Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, but I think somebody who could be interested in the running back position would be Travis Etienne. Anyone, Shawn, standing out here for you? DJ Moore goes in the zone. I think Devontae Smith could come into the conversation here for us at wide receiver as the second pick. Cooper Kupp's in there, DK Metcalf, George Kittle, Stephon Diggs, who I know you have mentioned in your article as one of the most mispriced players. All potential available options here for us. So while some of the people we were hoping may have dropped a couple of spots have gone, there's still a lot of options here available to us. Who are you kind of thinking consideration true here? Is it to get 2 of those wide receivers?
Well, as you mentioned, ETN is one of the top ADP fellows. He does go right before us, as you mentioned there. That is too bad because this format is a little bit heavier at running back than the normal FFPC formats. Colm, I think that we should take your preference between the 2 49ers receivers, and then there isn't a great additional option here. So we could go with Devontae Smith for the second pick. We could also reach all the way down and take a George Kittle. Probably more, though, if we passed on both of the 49ers. Let's start with the 49ers guy. Do you have a preference there?
I've just been kind of splitting them up between drafts. Kind of the last couple of drafts have been going towards Deebo, so I'm good to go with Deebo if that's the way you want to go. Like both those guys, but have been starting to lean a little bit more towards Debo over the last couple of weeks. Shawn does take Brandon Ayuk, which is interesting.
Colm, I sort of misunderstood the direction you're going there. I was thinking you were saying you'd selected some Samuel, so
Debo.
you were good with balancing out.
I'm going to put the Devontae Smith should be the pick here. Then I'm going to push for that. Who's the other pick that you're going to mention?
No, there really isn't. There really isn't a pick. I think Devontae Smith is substantially undervalued. He's one where you kind of wonder if you could get him back through, especially in this draft where we have Hurts and where the drafters understand that they want to be relatively heavy at the running back spots. And when we know there are going to be the tight ends also probably coming off fast and furious.
So what you're telling me is in a RotoViz Overtime draft, you expect wide receivers to, be half a round after ADP back to us. Is that what you're expecting?
Well, these drafters call them very savvy. So I think we have to be aware of how that might work. But I love getting Ayuk and Devontae Smith there. As I mentioned, Smith's somebody whose ADP just absolutely makes no sense. He'll be the focus of a future article. He is going as the wide receiver 23. I mean, he's got such a clear path to targets, even if they run a similar style offense with a smaller overall pie. It's so clearly A.J. Brown and Smith was the better player over the second half of last season. He's been extremely dynamic anytime that Dallas Goedert has been out, and you hope that at some point the offensive staff realize that and figure out how to build this team such that when they have Dallas Goedert on the field, they're not somehow then ignoring what Devontae Smith brings to the table. I guess I don't know that there is a particularly clear reason to prefer, even someone like a Chris Olave, who's going a couple rounds earlier, someone like a Michael Pittman, I certainly think has some issues that he has to overcome there. You lose the offensive coordinator in Tampa Bay and Mike Evans, a lot more expensive. I probably like Devontae Smith ahead of Ayuk. I also have Deebo Smith ahead of Ayuk, and so it probably seems a little bit weird that we went the other way. Deebo was one of the players I profiled in the 5 Crazy Prices article. Part of the decision here is merely to get the guy who's more expensive when you're in the spot where that makes sense. Right? If you're going to take Deebo right there, then you're going to end up very exaggerated in terms of your exposures. You'd have to like Deebo a lot more in order to pull the trigger, when in many drafts, you'll be able to get Deebo in the middle or the back end of that round. I don't know that I have a big enough gap between them to do that. I think that Deebo is going to outscore him. I outlined the reasons for that in the article. I'm also concerned that with what he has to do carrying the ball, and then the track record with a variety of injuries, shoulder injuries, soft tissue injuries, that the biggest concern for me is not the scoring level, which I expect to be elite. I mean, he's wide receiver 17. I think he's pretty clearly a top 10 wide receiver when he's healthy. The question is, in any given year, how healthy will he be, and how much do you weight his struggles in the past when we're talking about the potential for similar nagging injuries to cause him a problem in the future?
Yeah, and the other part is that they're like really, right beside each other in a same tier. There's a lot of guys, and I think the split is once you go past the Waddle, Ayuk, Devontae Smith, Samuel kind of gap there. I know the player that went next to Stephon Diggs, who you mentioned being, vastly mispriced. I think he's kind of between that and the next tier then as we move down, but all very fair as to what you said there. And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out before it gets back to us. Some of the names that I've added to the queue that are usually in that ADP range, potentially Zay Flowers, Kenneth Walker, and T. Higgins. I think Kenneth Walker is a very appealing option in this format, as Shawn already mentioned. The running back having additional value, and to reference that again, it is that it's super flex, but it's not adding an additional roster spot. It's taking one of the flex and giving it the ability to be super flex, which then kind of lessens the need to try and have 4 wide receivers to have in your lineup each and every week. So we are 12 picks away, plenty of time to talk it through. Shawn, something that's interesting though, again, a lot of the stuff that we kind of discuss on shows may come to fruition with other drafters in this. So far, we're all the way through Jake Ferguson at this particular point off the draft, and that there was tight end 10. We have a Kettle, Bowers, and the rest of the crew prior to that, the normal names off the board. That is at the 509. Lots of tight end movement. We have multiple teams, 2 teams, in fact, with 2 tight ends. We have a Sam Laporta, Brock Bowers team. We have an Evan Ingram, Jake Ferguson team. We'll see how the rest of the draft play. Something that we've talked about a little bit in regular formats is the double elite tight end kind of approach. So that means that, Shawn, a lot of those names that we would quite often be discussing as potential options are off the board. And it's not that they're off the board significantly more early than normal. Jake Ferguson, for example, is usually the 6'12", goes at the 5'10" in this. So it is getting pulled up a bit around, but nothing extreme enough that it's going to push a lot of names back down beyond and help us get some additional targets. They're still going in a similar kind of zone. And Joku does go off the board, though, at the 602, usually goes in that 7th round. And no surprise, Shawn, that Brock Bowers in this draft went where he did in the 5th round when he's normally going off the board in the 7th round. But again, somebody who's vastly undervalued in this format. Zay Flowers is the next pick off the board. It's going to be interesting. And because we're picking at the turn, it's hard to really have a focus when you're 8 picks away as to who you're hoping to get. But any other running backs in the list, Shawn, kind of here that would make you think about going running back over, let's say, wide receiver? Because tight end at the moment we're down to, well, I guess we're down to Dallas Goedert as the next tight end, but it's TJ Hawkinson, Schultz, Fairmouth, Cole Kmet, Luke Musgrave as the options following on from that. So I think we're in a zone here, unless we were looking to stack up, that we are going wide receiver or running back. But the running backs are Josh Jacobs, Rashad White, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, Kenneth Walker, Aaron Jones, DeAndre Swift, David Montgomery, Ramondre Stevenson, who got a big new contract this week, then James Conner. So there's a couple of names on there we've discussed on some shows recently, but any of those names standing out as potential options here for us? Are you looking again towards the wide receiver position, or is Goddard somebody who you would consider if this gets very flat here with 4 picks to go?
I think that tight end will level out at a certain point, and it makes more sense to address it again then, as opposed to chase here. It is unfortunate because we do, not need, but it would be nice to take a running back here. I'm doing a draft out of this early slot with Zachary Kruger as well. And we got caught in a draft where we ended up with basically all wide receivers, contrasted to the other draft that we're doing, where we were able to get the 3 big running back values early. And so you work through some of those different types of things. You work through the draft that you're actually in. Colm, in addition to everything else, the 2 guys that we were kind of looking at there, and Kenneth Walker goes at the 609, T. Higgins at the 610. We're down into a range here where we have to make a pretty big ADP reach. And yet this is also the type of draft where I would just go ahead and do that, because I think these players are dramatically undervalued. The 2 names that you have in the queue are Keenan Allen and Jaden Reed. That's the direction I would go. Is there another player we should also throw into the mix?
No, they're the 2 players. If you picked the priority out of the 2 of those guys, the other player I thought you were potentially going to edge there when you were mentioning about jumping down would be Xavier Worthy, but there is a slight chance that he makes it back to us. But in this room, I think there's no chance of that. So if he was a player that you want to get in the mix here, this would be kind of the time to do it, I think, in this particular draft room. Do you want to go with Allen or Reed here first?
Yeah, let's go with Keenan Allen. He's the player of the 3 Chicago Bears that I'm targeting the most. Now, I like all 3 of them. I like Caleb Williams. I think that's something that in best ball you want to lean in pretty heavily. But Keenan Allen's situation makes virtually no sense, right? He was the 3rd highest scoring wide receiver last year by points per game. He was fantastic also in 2022. And this isn't a situation where the incumbents in DJ Moore have any familiarity with either the coach or the quarterback. So I don't think that we should have that gap in any way, shape, or form. I love that there. And then Jaden Reed, I made the case on last week's Best Ball Banana Stand that he's the most undervalued player in all of fantasy football. Colm, I mentioned this a few times. Again, no pressure to anyone to clog up their devices, but if you're interested in that, love for you to subscribe and get that every week. It is a lot of fun doing those drafts with Pete. Colm, I agree with you on Worthy. I don't think that he will come back. He didn't come around with two more picks. We get George Pickens and Xavier Worthy. He goes to Mr.
That's why I wanted
obviously should be selecting Xavier Worthy there. Mr. Banana Grabber has Patrick Mahomes, Jordan Love, Travis Kelce, Jalen Waddle, Deebo Samuel, T. Higgins, and Xavier Worthy. That is a tournament winning team if I've ever seen one. It also is a very heavy Kansas City Chiefs team. Colm, Patrick Mahomes actually underperformed the passing FPOE last year. He was negative in terms of fantasy points over expectation. We shouldn't expect that to happen in too many seasons. He was actually the number 2 pick in our previous draft, going ahead of Jalen Hurts. How comfortable are you with Mahomes, Stroud, and even Lamar Jackson being considered in this kind of 1B range, if not just simply in the top tier along with Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts?
I think there's a lot of drafters that are going to have them in that same tier. I think for most people, they probably have a tier of 5, and that splits off before Anthony Richardson. So that would be CJ Stroud, Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Allen, and Hurts. I think it's those top 2 guys in particular because of the kind of the rushing ability that they've shown over multiple years. But I do have there's an asterisk beside Patrick Mahomes that he basically, for me, is in that group. And I think that when you're drafting, if you're in the 3rd spot, I would take Mahomes over Christian McCaffrey, for example, and then I would start to consider what I'm doing with a non-quarterback at that particular point, whether you go CeeDee Lamb or McCaffrey over the likes of Stroud or Jackson. And I do think there's a split in those 2 tiers, but I think it's a tier of 1A and a tier then of 1B, and maybe you should just call that tier 1 and tier 2. But I think it's very close, and I think they all should be 1st-round picks. I don't have any disagreement with people that want to do that. So in the 1st round, I think it is a case of ranking them as to how you prefer to draft them. But mine is, if I'm in spot 1 or 2, I think it has to be Allen or Hurts, and then the conversation starts for the other positions. The way they've gone in this draft, I think that's the order that they should go, where Mahomes goes as the 3rd guy, then Stroud, then Jackson. But I think you'll see that order of Jackson and Stroud, change from draft to draft. So I think that those guys are clearly above the rest, but I also have them split kind of at that Allen to Mahomes point just slightly.
So now we're starting to see these running backs who are not priority targets for the RV community really fall. Josh Jacobs is normally the 601. We are at the 710. He hasn't gone. Joe Mixon, middle of the 6th. He hasn't gone. Rashad White, the same thing. Tim does get him for the 710, and that creates a team now where he has Bijan Robinson and Jacobs together with Amon-Ra, Drake London, and Zay Flowers at receiver, Cousins and Herbert at good prices at the wide receiver spot. That's a very well done beginning 7 rounds in terms of making the right choices in rounds 2 and 3 to not chase at the QB position, take advantage of the good values you're going to get later. You get those 3 early wide receivers to set you up very nicely at that position, and then you take the huge value on Josh Jacobs. Colin, we haven't been taking Josh Jacobs a lot, but I would have taken him there, right? We were at the 6-7 turn. We liked Allen and Reed. If I had been in that spot, I would have clicked Josh Jacobs. I love that pick for him. We're still a full round away, but I have to ask you as we start to get closer here, Joe Mixon with the Texans, not an elite talent, but probably in a fantastic situation. If he were to fall all the way through and we don't have a running back yet, I would be pretty comfortable with that. Where's your comfort level with a Mixon at, massively discounted price?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you give me multiple rounds beyond ADP, it starts to become a a conversation. I think we will have to discuss that. I think all the running backs, Shawn, when they start to fall that far, like White usually goes one pick before him. He hasn't gone yet. Not really interested though in Alvin Kamara. I think we'll look to see maybe Kendry Miller later. Aaron Jones, even though it's not as much of a discount. I think all these running backs are very interesting. That was the reason I wanted to kind of go wide receiver that last pick once Walker went, because the drafts I have done, when you get to this 8-9 kind of range at the front, if you're drafting, between the 103 and 104, I have found it relatively easy to get two running backs in those two spots that I like quite a bit. So maybe it is a case that some of our priority guys would go off the board prior to it getting back to us, but that would mean that those guys will continue to push down. Ideally, what I would like to see happen is the likes of White and Mixon get pulled off the board here, and that pushes some of the kind of true targets that we have at the running back position down to us, would be my preferred option. But if all those guys go, I think we'll be in a conversation here for what we will do at the running back position. We are 3 selections away. How are you looking, to manipulate this 8-9 turn here?
It's hard not to lean back into some of the receivers, even receivers who tend to go much later. One of the things I was hoping for is that after selecting Allen and Reed, it would have been a perfect fit to be able to come back with Jordan Addison and Jackson Smith and Jigba, but they do go just ahead of us in round 8. Then we're followed by Christian Watson and Keon Coleman. We're in the middle of a big wide receiver run. Colm, that leaves us Rashee Rice as an interesting pick, but I do think this is probably a choice of 2 players from the group of DeAndre Swift, Ramondre Stevenson, and Aaron Jones. Maybe also considering this next group of tight ends in Goddard, Hawkinson, and Freiermuth. Do you have a specific name there that jumps out as being definitively the first of our 2 picks?
They're all right beside each other. I think I would lean Aaron Jones for the correlation with the Packers if we were looking to do something like that. I think it's Aaron Jones, and for me this season I would go Aaron Jones and Ramondre Stevenson out of those 2 guys, unless you have a preference for the second name to push Swift over Stevenson. Part of that might be just getting bumped a little bit because of the Patriots showing their faith in Stevenson this week, but I feel like everything we thought about Stevenson heading into last season is still there, and I think when we're getting him at this point of the draft makes him very, very intriguing. The other part with the Aaron Jones pick is obviously now in Minnesota. I think that he's going to get pretty much all the work he can handle there. So I think we have 2 situations where there's multiple running backs in those running back rooms, but it feels very much like it is a clear starter and then other running backs beyond that. And I feel like both of those running backs in previous years would be very much in the dead zone. So there'd be multiple rounds ahead of that. And I think we're getting them at what I don't know if you agree with this. I feel like they're at the appropriate price this season. And that makes them, more palatable to take in those situations. And because the running back position is a little bit more weighted in this, again, because of the little detriment to the wide receiver position with the way the flex positions are set up, not needing as many of those, I think dipping into the wide receiver market there at that point makes sense. And the other part of that is like some of the names that we really are targeting, the likes of Jalen Warren, even maybe like if we look at James Conner goes in this range, but beyond that, then it's, Warren, Mostert, as we get down into Tajay Spears, Javonte Williams, I would expect that potentially we get 2 more very interesting options at that next turn. And I think I would rather them over the tight end at that particular point in Goddard for this roster. Goddard does go off the board in the mid round. Were you interested in some of these wide tight ends? I felt with the way just experience these drafts playing out recently that this is a prime zone kind of 8 through 12 for running backs.
It is such a good situation there for the backs. I do worry that with Freiermuth and Hawkinson having round 10 ADPs and Cole Kmet early in 11, that those guys may not come back to us. And then there's a very substantial tier break after that. Luke Musgrave may be the one player who might break out and have a big performance, from that early 12 ADP. But the biggest problem that we ran into in the first draft was simply, even after we had the 2 early studs, the getting a third tight end. We never got to a fourth tight end. Obviously, that was difficult because of the way the tight ends go off in this room. So I think that potentially considering those guys there would have been a smart option when you think back to, who you might get at running back later. Having said that, my rankings have Aaron Jones about around ahead of ADP. They have Ramondre Stevenson around ahead of ADP. And where we were able to draft them was well below that. So if you have players ranked well ahead of ADP, you're going to get a good discount to that in the actual draft. Now, some of that obviously is specific to the room, and those ADP values offset with other things that you have to do. But I think getting those running backs after we were able to address the earlier elements, and knowing that we do have the 2-star quarterbacks, that we took a tight end early, we're going to need a lot more still. But having Trey McBride, that gives you a foundation tight end that you hope is in the lineup most weeks, certainly not necessarily all weeks. And that's one of the reasons why you do want to work back through, and you want to give yourself a shot for the tight end, your tight end 2, your tight end 3, to potentially every once in a while leak into that super flex spot as well. But I'm with you. I think the value on those running backs was too much to pass up. If you get your guys in this type of format, you want to make sure you take them.
Yeah, and the one part that could be challenging is, like, I've added players to the queue now over the course of when Shawn was discussing kind of the selection options there. And when we look at it, Jalen Warren, Raheem Mostert, Javonte Williams, Brian Robinson, Devin Singletary, Chase Brown, Kendry Miller, all likely to be players that are in conversation at that next turn. But I feel then that if, you have another one of those, potentially 2 of those, it really sets up the running back room in a very strong position after having bypassed the position for those opening 7 picks. The other thing I did come into my mind earlier and then forgot to mention was when you have the 2 quarterbacks early, we've talked about the reasons maybe to avoid that, but when we have Hurts and Daniels, there's a lot of these rounds where at the moment, for example, Will Levis is past ADP, Derek Carr is past ADP, JJ McCarthy is right at ADP, Russell Wilson then's coming up towards ADP, Drake May. There's a lot of those secondary quarterback options come up in this range, and you're usually looking then to get into a 3 quarterback build if you've taken one, maybe if you haven't taken any, but even if you've taken one in those first 2 rounds, you're looking to get into that zone of quarterback. And it means that a lot of the time in this, you're either trying to push quarterback to see who falls another round, or else you're in a situation where you're having to pass up on some of these names like Aaron Jones, like Stevenson. For example, in this draft, in this round, there's only been 1 quarterback off the board, but it was Bryce Young. But you're taking him over all those names that I've mentioned, who I think the 1v1 of, Young, very young, and let's say, well, they took Dak Prescott on that roster, but how that balances out. Now, as I say, that Jalen Warren goes off the board, but I think there is something, Shawn, with freedom, having the 2 quarterbacks in those opening rounds to bypass some of these options for better players at the skill positions, which is also appealing. Something that I have thought about multiple times when we're pushing quarterback and we're thinking, I really wish I could just pick these 2 non-quarterback players at this point in time.
Yeah, one of the things that happens in this draft is I think that the QBs go at more appropriate prices, such that those decisions are tougher. Whereas if you execute a 0 RB in most other drafts, you're going to pretty clearly come out ahead. Pat Freiermuth goes off in the middle of 10 to the team that started Jackson, Prescott, and now has Kincaid and Freiermuth. That team also took the big ADP value on Rachaad White. We'll see if that works out, but certainly pairing him with Derrick Henry gives that roster, drafting from the 108, a very, very balanced squad. That one looking good from a variety of perspectives. Colm, as we move toward the 10-11 turn, Raheem Mostert continues to be such a weird name and weird value. If he comes back to us, I think we almost have to select him. But otherwise, even making the move of, say, taking both Kmet and Musgrave, I think is an interesting way to play it, to stay ahead of that sort of second wave of tight ends coming off the board. You don't have Jonathan Brooks in the queue. I'm going to go ahead and add him there. Is there a concern that you have with his health or that offense, or is that an oversight?
No, that's more so priority of the. I've been drafting the other players, and I also thought Jonathan Brooks would go off the board before it got to us. He went off there. That's more of a tongue-in-cheek comment, but more so that I like the players that I'm really hoping to get at this point would be Raheem Mostert would be my priority, and then I've been starting to come around a bit on Javonte. He was somebody I wasn't drafting as much. The reports are very positive health-wise, quite optimistic around that. And then Brian Robinson, Devin Singletary, Chase Brown all go in this tier. So not really a knock on him overall, but I prefer those guys in the offenses that they are in currently over Brooks in the situation that he's in. So that would be the reason there. We are one pick away. Jamison Williams went off the board. You mentioned the tight end, Shawn. I do think I would push tight end here for two of these running backs, unless there was another wide receiver of interest. I think there's a pretty big gap here at wide receiver to some of the next options. I think that the running backs here, and I would think that one of Cole Kmet or Musgrave might sneak its way back to us. It depends on if you want to risk that, because then you're into the Conklin, Henry, Otten, kind of scenario of options, which gets a little bit dicey. So I'm willing to push it, but if you want to go with a tight end, that's okay. But Mostert would be my first pick here.
Yeah, let's go ahead and take Mostert. That seems pretty clear cut. The next pick there, I think, is between Tyjae Spears and probably Cole Kmet.
Well, my thing on that, I prefer Musgrave over Kmet, and ADP Musgrave goes after him. That would be kind of the reason I'm willing to push it, to see if one of those two guys do come back to us. There's a round of ADP basically between where those two guys go. So I'd be willing to lose Kmet to get Musgrave if you wanted to go with Spears.
So we go ahead and take Spears there. The other thing, I don't necessarily love Kmet with Keenan Allen if you don't have Caleb Williams, as I do want Keenan Allen on those rosters to be the guy who sort of emerges. If Kmet also has a big season, then it starts to squeeze those receiving options a little bit. Now, one of the things is that, Kmet, from a talent perspective and what he did last season, deserves to be going. I have a hard time with Dalton Schultz and Dallas Goedert, simply because I think the addition of the third receiver there probably squeezes Schultz more than ADP suggests. Now, the flip side of that is that, CJ Stroud, to me, seems like he's going to take another step and is going to have, and maybe not this season, but within the next 2 or 3 years, he's going to have one of those peak Breeze, Brady, Rodgers, Mahomes types of years. And when you do that,
Peyton Manning 50 touchdown season, I thought was the initial comparison.
Right. So, if you do that, one of the things with the peak Peyton Manning season there, and this is going to come out in an article I'm writing about the Seahawks, but you had Demaryius Thomas, Eric Decker, Wes Welker, Julius Thomas come through there and all score big. Dalton Schultz would be the guy in that situation. So in no way, shape, or form, completely ignoring the possibility for that. And Schultz scoring as the fourth piece in a CJ Stroud passing attack is much more likely to me than Cole Kmet scoring as the big piece in a Caleb Williams passing attack. However, they're not priced equally either. And so you have to consider that element of it. Cole Kmet being the better player and the much cheaper player. If you start to get into teammate injuries, I think he gets launched a lot more easily than Schultz does.
I would agree. I would prefer to have Komet over Schultz. Obviously, one kind of potential knock would be the Allen part of it, but then if we're getting him after being able to add those 4 running backs with the 4 wide receivers, the 2 quarterbacks, and so on, I think that if he makes it another 17 picks, it would be an absolutely must click. But we are starting to get right into that range of ADP. We're into, coming into the mid 120s, and he usually goes off the board at 126. Luke Musgrave, who I mentioned, is 137. So I feel like there's a chance, but depends then on teams if they're looking to add those guys in and they toggle it over. Shawn, 2 tight end, those are the next 2 guys off the board. But Tyler Conklin is 1 pick after ADP for Musgrave, so maybe somebody wants to go that direction. We do have an Aaron Rodgers drafter who did take Dalton Schultz. Maybe that's the way they go on the swing back there after taking Devin Singletary. Very interesting, Shawn, here. There's another one of them. So we went running back. Run. Yeah, massive running back run. So we have a James Conner, Brooks, Derek Carr, Jameson Williams, Amir White. We took Mostert and Spears. Then it was Trey Benson, Javonte Williams, Chase Brown, Brian Robinson, Tony Pollard, Devin Singletary, Blake Corum. That run has been broken by Romeo Dobbs. But Shawn, that's pretty much an entire round of running back there, minus the Derek Carr, Jameson Williams selection. But I'm even more happy now, and Colm has gone off the board, but I am more happy that we took those 2 particular running backs. We'll see if that's the case at the end of the draft. But, sometimes when you look at a queue, you can be like, we have a lot of running back options that are going to be available to us at the next turn potentially. But most of those options that we would have been factoring in outside of Kendry Miller have all been wiped off the board. And there's still a hope that Luke Musgrave might sneak back to us. We have the drafter in 12 has 1 tight end, is Kyle Pitts. There's 11 has Njoku. Team 10 now has 2 tight ends. Team 9 has 2 tight ends. Team 8 has 2 tight ends. The Dalton Schultz drafter, who is Aaron Rodgers. So hopefully they go in that tight end direction. And then we have 2 tight ends in Team 6, Team 5. And then we have a Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce. The one that would be of quite a large amount of concern, the team out of 2 so far, is a team that has no tight end. So we'll see what plays out there. And then as I look through the board, I'm trying to find that Jordan Love drafter who is the drafter out of 3. So there's a couple of ways that may not work out for us, Shawn. Then we'll be back into our boy Noah Fant's range of outcomes.
There has never been any chance that Luke Musgrave will come back. So,
if he comes back, Shawn, it would just be amazing, because there's often times where I'm like, Shawn, that player has no chance of coming back, and he never comes back. So we'll see. Maybe this is the one that works out.
We'll have to come up with something that I have to do as a penalty for saying there's no chance if he does actually come back through. But the problem we run into, as you explained, is that once Luke Musgrave is off the board, there really are no additional tight ends that you want. Ben Sinnott is interesting. We've mentioned him as the 2024 Sam Laporta. He's not really getting that same buzz as far as I can tell. And you have the complicating factor of a Zach Ertz. We know the problems that caused for Trey McBride. And it doesn't really matter how good Ben Sinnott is. He's not going to be as good as Trey McBride. And so if
I have to
coaches
mention
can't understand the gap between Trey McBride and Zach Ertz, then they're not going to understand the gap between anybody and Zach Ertz.
I have to mention this, though, when we're talking about tight ends, that never fear, Greg Dulcich will still be an option as well, because people love the Dulcich talk, even though we never get to draft him. But yeah, he's still available. Never fear, Shawn. We have options. We are 9 picks away now. We have seen Charbonnet, JJ McCarthy, and Kendry Miller go off the draft board. So we are getting closer to Musgrave getting back, but I'm ready to have my heart ripped out of my chest, Shawn, here as I see his name eventually go off the board. You've added Ford, Jerome Ford, that is, Marshawn Lloyd, Jalen Wright to the roster, all very interesting names. The one thing in this, there is obviously a little bit of an edge, as we've touched on a few times, to the running back position. Really going 6 running back picks in a row probably wasn't on my pre-draft plan, but any other names outside of those guys? Like, is this kind of a flat area for you in the draft? Is there any of these? We've talked a little bit about Justin Fields. The reports continue, though, unfortunately, not to be very positive on his side of things. He would be potentially an option here as a 3rd quarterback. I feel, though, that there's other needs on this team beyond a 3rd quarterback. Curtis Samuel, any of those kind of wide receiver options in this range of appeal to you?
For me, it's Jerry Jeudy.
Yeah.
Right. He's the only guy who has the background and the potential to become a star from this group. And I don't think that you can just be drafting guys on the outside chance that they score some points. You don't want your roster set up that way, right? The way that you approach these leagues is to figure out how you can navigate a draft such that you're not making weaker picks to address positional needs. And I like where we're in from that perspective. I mean, Jeudy might have a lower floor from a 1 week explosion perspective than some of the guys that are going. But if he can stay healthy and the Cleveland Browns have a decent season, one of the things when you look at the Browns numbers, you hear a lot of people talking about how Joe Flacco boosted them. And there were elements to what they did down the stretch that mesh with that. And yet you look at his actual performance and it wasn't very good. It was more that they needed to throw. You also look at what the receiving weapons in that offense had to deal with last year before that happened, where you're getting guys like Walker, and when you have non-passing QBs taking a big chunk of that season, it's going to knock down the results for everyone. When you consider age and when you consider the ability to get open, I don't know that there's a big gap between Amari Cooper and a Jerry Jeudy. And so he's a pretty easy pick here. He could be the wide receiver 1 for them this season. But I also don't think that you have to push too much at the receiver spot in a draft when you've taken Ayuk, Smith, Allen, and Reed. It's more looking at the late guys. Who would you want to tack on to get, that 1 week explosion? So you're looking at someone like maybe a Devontae Walker late, as opposed to thinking you have to draft here. Now, the other name I do think is interesting, and it's interesting from the perspective of maybe being a blow up guy, but then also, when we see some of the names coming off here, it's hard for me to understand how they would be better 1 week plays than an Adonai Mitchell. So he's somebody else I think we could look at. Colm, we do get some quarterback names here in this second chunk of the show.
You went, Shawn.
We got Drake May, we got Will Levis, we got Derek Carr in round 10, we got JJ McCarthy in 11. We now have Russell Wilson come off in 12. Colm, Luke Musgrave got farther than I thought. We had the Dalton Schultz drafter with only the one tight end and not an elite tight end pass on him for Ty Chandler. That's an interesting selection there. We have Aaron Jones, so we've made a little bit of a bet on the Vikings running game. I guess with the quarterback play that I expect them to have this season, I'm maybe not as optimistic about their chances with a backup running back, even with Ty Chandler being one of my favorites in the past. So, Colm, we are up. We do have the option of a Jerry Jeudy. We do have an option of Mitchell. We could take a guy like Jerome Ford, even though in the tournament portion, in the playoff portion, I still kind of think that will be a Nick Chubb. What types of preferences do you have here?
I think we go with Jeudy with the first pick. Then we can talk through the other options. So it would be jumping down, quite a bit in ADP. The running backs that you've mentioned are all fine, but based on what we've done in the last couple of rounds, I think we can take kind of. It's up to you if you want to go for a second wide receiver here. But we could take kind of 2 of the high end wide receivers that we see from this group. Might force some things at the wide receiver position, like it did at the running back position in the last 2 rounds, and we might see some interesting running back names get back to us. And I know you have some guys that we've talked about, even later at the running back position that could be interesting. I don't really, I'm gutted, to be honest, Shawn, by the Luke Musgrave pick going. Who do you want to take second here?
Well, the other name who probably won't come back is Sinnott. And in a situation here where we have
okay, let's do that. That makes sense. Yep, it makes sense with the Daniels part really pulls it into focus. Furious, Shawn, I think is the word I would use here with the Luke Musgrave pick. Furious.
I wasn't even paying attention because, again, there was no chance. We had the drafter in 11 does take Justin Fields instead of a tight end. I don't think that's a huge shock to me because, again, Musgrave was the massive end of a tier where, I mean, Tyler Conklin, Hunter Henry, Cade Otton, I think those guys are draftable, but they're much more, round 14, 15 types of plays. Cade Otton, I think, is not draftable at all. Noah Fant is an interesting name who would give us our Seattle play. Certainly wouldn't mind adding him to this roster. Colm, where are you on Mike Gesicki? We've enjoyed taking him sometimes in the past. It has never worked out.
It has worked out 0% of the time, I think, would be the amount of times. Always loved Gesicki, always wanted it to happen, always thought it would happen, and it has not happened. Whether that's in Miami or New England, now he's in an amazing situation in Cincinnati. And what I would say is, again, part of the reason this year, I haven't really been drafting him. I haven't really been drafting Senate all that much is because I've been putting such a focus on getting two of the tight ends through those first kind of 9-10 guys that we talked about at the start of this draft. Once you get down past Bowers or Njoku, I think it gets really tough beyond that point of guys that realistically I want to roster. So I'm very overweight on those top tight ends with two of them on most rosters. So I haven't really been getting down into the weeds at this part of tight end kind of ADP. I've been going in different positions and trying to have the guys that I want on the roster long prior to this. If we're looking at the potential profiles that could have that massive season, you're talking about, Jerry Jeudy having those massive games, but we're looking at, Gesicki. The potential, Shawn, is there. The potential just has not been realized. Will it be a real late career breakout? Potentially, but he's in a fantastic situation. We have seen tight ends have some, big games in that Bengals offense over the last couple of seasons. So he's interesting. There is some kind of names that as we go down, we missed out on Luke Musgrave, but that then opens up the door to potential interest in the likes of a Tucker Kraft later on. So my answer to the question with Mike Gesicki is I would love to see it happen, but realistically, if it hasn't happened by now, it's probably getting less and less likely that it's actually going to come to fruition. But the one part of that I would say, and again, exception probably more than the rule, but we are seeing Evan Ingram, get drafted in the 4th round of this draft. And he was somebody who went through that same stretch, although he had probably more success earlier in his career than Mike Gesicki did. But, it was never fully realized potential up until he went to Jacksonville. So who knows? The other part of that is that he also doesn't have T. Higgins and Jamar Chase in front of him as wide receivers trying to fight for those targets. But there is some other names, and looking at a rookie coming in this year that may be mispriced, but it's in a bad offense, that would be looking there at Jatavion Sanders. And I don't know, Shawn, if this is just for, to make me say his name again or to have some fun, but Shawn has added Greg Dulcich to the queue also, which is I think that's just to tilt me over the course of the next couple of rounds. He's a player
that's funny when
Shawn,
you look up Greg Dulcich and the reports are that he's about to be healthy. And you're like, about to be healthy from what? I mean, he's never played. We're in the middle of the offseason and he's not healthy. It's like, yeah, I mean.
We had this last year, Shawn, at the end of the season where he was meant to come off injured reserve. And we had a couple of teams where we were like really wanting that extra tight end help. And every week the report was, Greg Dulcich just sounds like he's going to be ready to start practicing this week. And he never practiced before the end of the season last year. That was multiple weeks of the report. But we'll see, Shawn. We may go that direction. But there is still options, but it gets very, very ugly from this point forward. And I think it also shows the reasons as to why, we're prioritizing those guys that are in that real top tier of tight ends over the options here, because it does it's kind of filled with guys who I think are pretty much dead zone tight ends who are not going to have big seasons and are probably not going to have spike weeks along the course of the season either. So we have seen 3 guys go off the board: Hunter Henry, Noah Fant, who we're touching on. Tyler Conklin goes, quite a bit after ADP to the David Njoku drafter. So again, but the Senate pick, Shawn, somebody who we talked during draft season with the high potential upside, there is question marks around like how you could be using that offense. And, obviously we have Zach Ertz as a roadblock again, similar to what we did with Trey McBride, but players who could be mispriced at this particular point, I feel like he is one is right in that area where we could be getting a multiple round discount on where he is if he's starting, week 5, week 6 of the season. Then Luke Musgrave I really did want Musgrave to go back because we've talked about this a few times, the price of Musgrave versus the price of Tucker Kraft. And I feel like you might be leaning more on the Kraft side of it due to the price discount. I've been kind of leaning more into the Musgrave side of it. So both of those guys, though, just athletic talents that are in an offense I feel like the Packers are going to really spread the ball around outside of Jaden Reed, who I think will get the majority of the wide receiver work there. And then, the 2 tight ends are going to have touchdown upside weeks, I guess I would call them. So we'll see what comes back to us. Conco just went off the board, Austin Eckler, Josh Downs, Gus Edwards. A lot of tight ends, Shawn, in the queue with some young running backs here. We are in an area of the draft which gets pretty ugly, but Kamami Vidal is of interest. Chuba Hubbard, Ray Davis. Feels like there's a lot of running backs here. Bucky Irvine also in this range. Start to get into even Quentin Johnson, Shawn's in this range. How are you feeling about the overall construction of the roster now? We did pass up on running backs at the last round, and I think in hindsight that's going to turn out to be a smart decision with the running back options that will be available potentially at this pick. Vidal does go off the board as I highlight how good that pick was going to be before he got to us. How are you feeling with the 4 running backs, 5 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, and Jalen Hurts and Jim Daniels?
Yeah, well, Eric selected Jaleel McLaughlin in the middle of 13, and I think that was probably a very savvy pick. I have been somewhat off of him with the idea that he was going to get squeezed by the young players and Javonte Williams, and yet the flip side of that is that there's a very strong possibility he ends up as the running back 1, and he would just annihilate ADP from the 13th round if that is the case. We do get back here with Leggett going 1 pick ahead, Davis going 2 picks ahead. Colm, I don't know that we have a super clear option or even position, but this would be a spot where we could take an Aiden O'Connell. It's a spot where we could take a Bucky Irving. Do you have
I know Bucky Irving's your
first pick?
I know Irving's your guy, so let's get him, and then we can discuss the second pick here. O'Connell is the quarterback that kind of was of interest. Depends if we want to get into that 3rd quarterback range, but he is interesting at this particular point. I think there's a chance again, don't want to jinx it, that he would get back to us if we have somebody else that we wanted to go to at the running back position here. Chuba Hubbard would probably be the other pick that I'd be looking at here, or a Quentin Johnson. I think the wide receivers kind of disappear from this point forward.
Yeah, let's go ahead and take QJ, and
we have to get it in, Shawn.
Yeah, you got to get him onto some of these teams here. He is a lot of fun. At this price, the fact that his likelihood of bouncing back in 2024 is minimal is pretty fully priced in, right? I mean, he's going after players like Brandon Cooks, after a Joshua Palmer, who I just simply don't think the team is going to prioritize in the same way. He's going after a Josh Downs, who is kind of buried by that Mitchell acquisition. He's going after a Jacoby Myers, a player I like, but I think is probably better for reality than fantasy, especially after the addition of a Brock Bowers. One of the things that the Chargers have been saying is that they, even the guys who were not part of the brain trust who made that pick, you think about the head coach, you think about the offensive coordinator there, saying that they liked it and they like him and they feel like the way Kellen Moore used him last year was completely and totally wrong, which I think anybody who watched the games was also thinking. You look at what he did and what he did to Michigan in the college football semifinals the previous year, And he's able to get deep, but he's also a manufactured touch guy underneath where he takes those short passes and then is excellent with the ball in his hands. Los Angeles didn't do that for him last year. Because they have some other weapons at this point, because they have a little bit different style that they are going to use, I don't even necessarily think that if Ladd McConkey is really good, that hurts Quentin Johnston, right? I mean, you really need for Josh Palmer to also impress the new coaching staff and to be a better fit for some of the things that they want to do for this to be a big issue. I mean, this is just a team that doesn't have a lot of weapons in the passing game. If Johnston doesn't emerge, I think they're going to throw him a lot of stuff underneath in the 2024 campaign and give him a chance to show something so that they can then make a decision and move on. But they're not going to move on before the new coaches get to pursue this thesis that he was used improperly last year. So I think from that perspective, when you're thinking about a guy who is in an offense with very, very weak competition and you still get the good quarterback, you have a much upgraded overall coaching staff, and you're going to get manufactured touches in a full PPR format, you have to like that, especially because that vertical element of the game is still there for individual shots. All he has to do is not flagrantly drop passes. Now, we know that that's probably going to be part of what he does going forward, but plenty of receivers with drops issues have succeeded in the NFL if they can do other things successfully. And so that'll be the question for him. Is he able to act as that underneath weapon for him? Again, in round 15, you've got some room for him to just be okay.
Yeah, and that to be like it's a for a player who came in with such expectations last year and how it really just couldn't have probably went much worse. Fantasy football at this point is just cast him aside. And I think everything that could potentially be downside is priced into that ADP, as Shawn has mentioned. Shawn, we have 5 picks left. We obviously invested a lot in the quarterback position early in the draft. What are you thinking through these next 5 selections that we kind of need to do? Obviously, we could add a quarterback. We probably, on this roster, maybe need to add an additional 2 tight ends. How are you feeling at wide receiver and running back? I feel like wide receiver is probably close to being set unless something happens that a very specific player lands towards us. There is some names that we are interested in, but I think the other positions at this point are more in need of work than the wide receiver position. How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, the setup is very nice in terms of the flexibility that we have. I am interested in a J.K. Dobbins, who is the top ADP name on the board. I think someone like a Tyler Algier, who faces one of our quarterbacks in Jaden Daniels in week 17, that is vaguely interesting from the perspective of, I mean, we certainly hope Bijan Robinson stays healthy, but there isn't a guarantee of that. And Algier had a 1,000-yard season as a rookie. He's someone that people are discounting simply because Robinson is so good, and the tea leaves do seem to suggest that it won't really be a committee, even with how good Algier has been in the past. The flip side of that there, what do we want to do at the tight end position? Do we want to add 1 or do we want to add 2? Troy Franklin goes a couple picks ahead of us. He's someone who is always exciting when you get to this portion of a draft. And Colm, I believe we just lost Tucker Kraft. He goes to Mr. Brandon Grabber in the 16th round after a 15th round selection of Isaiah Likely. So that team now is Travis Kelce, Likely, and Tucker Kraft. The team out of 2 just has Cade Otton, which is a little thin at tight end. The flip side of that, obviously, is that you get to build out a very strong roster at the other positions. And this isn't a format, that being the Superflex format, that requires as much tight end firepower. The pick is Dawson Knox. We are up.
I think it's Colm, the player you talked about, Shawn.
And is that Tyler Algier?
No, that's Mike Gesicki. I think if you want to go talk about the 2 picks, I think I would probably go with Dobbins and Gesicki based on positional need at tight end. I would be good to go with 2 running backs if you want to do that, but I'm kind of thinking we get one of our tight ends here. What are you thinking?
Yeah, so let's go ahead and take a J.K. Dobbins, and then we will additionally go ahead and take a Mike Gesicki. Now, we discussed Gesicki in the previous show. He has struggled, and I do think that the situation with the Bengals is interesting because the Dolphins simply ran an offense that didn't use him. And if you're not on the field, your athleticism can't play up, and he's more of a big receiver. They didn't want that. They had the 2 receiver set up with Waddle and the great Tyreek Hill that made that work. Then they wanted blocking at the tight end position. He goes to the Patriots, and the Patriots, unfortunately, were just an unbelievable train wreck last year. They didn't have coaching. They arguably didn't have QB play. I'm still enthusiastic about the long-term upside of a Mac Jones. I think he could be one of these guys who comes out and has a Geno Smith-like second act, and yet there just really was nothing to do with Gesicki once that offense completely collapsed. The Bengals are completely different. They have a competent coaching staff. You have a Joe Burrow. You're going to have the defensive attention on the 2-star receivers, and yet there have been individual games where the tight ends for the Bengals have scored for you. Gesicki is a better athlete. He's a better receiving weapon than those players were. The question is, how much of an emphasis is there going to be on that versus other things the Bengals could do? They have a couple of interesting wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 options. So there's certainly nothing forcing them to go to Gesicki in a way that's any more than, the occasional touchdown. But I think having the occasional touchdown with where we are in this particular roster is still something that's valuable to us.
Yeah, I think we're into a 4 tight end. Well, we'll see. We have 3 picks left, but I think 4 tight ends would probably make the most sense with this roster. But again, with the rookie and Sonat, and I think even being optimistic, they probably are going to have Ertz in there at the start of the season. You're kind of trying to make sure you can work through those situations. Obviously, we take Trey McBride in the 3rd round. You're hoping that he is the starting tight end in this lineup every single week of the season, but you do need those additional pieces in case, let's say there's a quarterback injury, there's quarterback bye weeks and all those sort of things. You want to have those potential spike weeks at the other position. So I think basically making our tight end 2 out of a trio of guys is probably the way to play it. I mentioned I would love Mike Gesicki to work out. I would love nothing more than J.K. Dobbins to be, somewhat towards full health this season, because I think, again, looking at players who could break contests, I feel like he would fit the mold for that as well. But injuries obviously have plagued him in recent times. Greg Dulcich did go off the board 1 pick after Mike Gesicki to have, obviously we have to say, Shawn, best draft pick of the entire draft with the Dulcich selection there. They did also mention in the chat here that goes on the FFPC league chat that they were hoping to get Gesicki. So we did snipe them in that particular pick. But you mentioned Tyler Algier again. When I'm in these drafts and we haven't built up quite as much at running back, if we had skipped on some of those running backs earlier where we took Aaron Jones, Stevenson, Mostert, and Spears, some of the names here are very interesting. The likes of Algier, who you mentioned, Hubbard, Shawn Johnson's interesting as well. There is some nice running back potential options in this area. If you hadn't have drafted Stevenson, Gibson could come in as an interesting option. Antonio Gibson, that is. But it's really kind of choose your own adventure when it gets to this particular point of the draft with the names that are available. You mentioned Luke McCaffrey. He's somebody who could potentially come in as an interesting wide receiver again on this roster with Jaden Daniels, potentially somebody I haven't drafted a lot of this offseason, but looking at players who have injuries that they're coming back from. Keaton Mitchell's in this area, Estime's in this area as a rookie. Braylon Allen's also in this area. So there's interesting names here. It just depends on which direction we need to take. And Shawn, I think we're going to have to end this draft immediately, as Shawn has done the unthinkable. Shawn, tell them what you're after doing. Tell them what's after happening here.
Well, I just wanted us to keep track of the fact that Zach Ertz is the other Washington guy. I think at the price you can put both of those Washington tight ends in there if you don't have other plays that you like. I think that Colby Parkinson is a little bit interesting. He's been talked up by the coaching staff. They paid him a surprising amount of money. The Rams don't really have a clear-cut option at tight end as Tyler Higbee rehabs. And yet, I mean, Parkinson could be an absolute zero as well, which is why he goes in this range. But the Rams have tended to get such... Well, what I should say is that the Rams' targets to the tight end have been very underneath. Yep. The ADOTs have been extremely low. And so if you're actually asked to play that role, you could get quite a few passes without having to really do much. You don't have to succeed downfield necessarily. Now, as I say that, Parkinson does go to Moose the Dog out of the 1805. I think that's a very nice pick to round out that tight end group that had Dalton Kincaid and Pat Freiermuth. Again, that team has been very well executed to this point. Colm, we're headed for our picks at the 18-19 turn.
Yeah.
We have an Aaron Jones on this roster. We weren't able to get TJ Hawkinson or Jordan Addison, a couple names that we like, but Sam Darnold has made it to this point. I think if you get that price on him, he's going in around 14. If we got him at the 18-12,
yeah,
that's probably the way I would lean at this point.
Yeah, and that's kind of, there's not many situations I'm looking to draft Darnold, but when we're looking at the price here and how much it's beyond ADP, I think it is in the conversation as the third. Oh, he went. Shawn, you got me to admit on a podcast that I was about to draft Sam Darnold, and then he got drafted. If you had asked me that question 15 seconds later, I would have never have uttered those words. But he would have been the selection that we would have been interested in there. We are back on the clock, Shawn. Some of the players, Luke McCaffrey is right here at ADP. The QBs that you have, I think I would see if I could push one of those to the last pick of the draft. Sam Howell, Joe Flacco. You mentioned Zach Ertz, he goes in this range. The other tight end that goes in this range that, now that Darren Waller has officially retired, Daniel Bellinger goes here in this zone. Do you want to take a Luke McCaffrey? Do you want to draft Zach Ertz? Is that a pick you want to leave? I would only want to really take one of those guys. If we were going to take one, I'd probably lean towards the receiver. But how are you feeling? What do you want to do here as we have 23 seconds left?
Yeah, the other pick that I have some interest in, and we're not really going to have time to go through, I should have brought it up a little bit earlier, would be a Jalen Tolbert. And you think about the way drafters are playing that Dallas Cowboys team, where a name like Jake Ferguson gets so massively inflated simply because in a one-game setting, he could score a ton of points. But also just when you look at the course of the season, they don't have anybody other than a CeeDee Lamb, and we expect the overall volume to be significant.
Well, we could go here.
I kind of think we're in a situation where if Jalen Tolbert is the guy who scores for us in the championship week, that things have gone the wrong way. But the other part of it is that he is the player opposite Jalen Hurts in week 17.
Yeah, I think, how do you think structurally for wide receiver? I think it still works because I think the running backs we have built are strong enough that we wouldn't have to go running back in the last round here. We could go tight end or quarterback if you want to go with Tolbert here.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and do that. Take Tolbert.
I agree that if we had talked about it a little bit more before the pick, the other players that I was really interested in there were Devontae Walker and Will Shipley. They both went in two of the three picks before us, along with Sam Darnold. So there was three names I was kind of looking at, and they all went back to back to back. But the McCaffrey pick also does fit this team, having Daniels on the roster as well. So in hindsight, Shawn, with those other three names going off the board, we didn't talk it through as much as we probably should have. What would you have done there with the McCaffrey and Tolbert picks? Would you want Tolbert and something else? We probably have one wide receiver more than necessary, but I do think that the Aaron Jones, Stevenson, Mostert, Spears trio fills me with a lot of confidence at the running back position that I think we normally would have allocated another spot. I was hoping that Will Shipley would have been that one, but how do you feel with the structure of the roster here?
Yeah, I like it. I don't have any issue with it. If I could go back in time, I would threaten huge repercussions if Will Shipley was selected as he was at the 18-11. That's the pick that would have been perfect for us. But Colin, we say that. I mean, the issue that we really have is not running back versus wide receiver. It's getting the tight ends and the quarterback there. Sam Howell does go here to, I mean, obviously to Pirates, could happen to anyone. It was too bad that Sam Darnold went a couple picks ahead of us. I really had meant to mention him at the 17, although Gesicki, I think, was a solid selection there. Parkinson also lasting back around. I put Zach Ertz into the queue. I don't want him on the team. Taking the 2 receivers there when we didn't have a running back that we wanted and we didn't have a need, I think is fine. Again, in this type of a format, if these correlation plays and Luke McCaffrey and Jalen Tolbert are in the lineup in the championship week, then we probably didn't win because we have a lot of other firepower that has so much more upside. But I think when you're talking about rounds 18, 19, you like that. I like those 2 individual players. I don't think it's something where you're drafting them exclusively because of who the quarterbacks are. McCaffrey is a pretty narrow path guy, but he's also an underneath guy. And even though that may not really fit with Jaden Daniels, as we expect him to scramble a ton. I mean, if Jaden Daniels doesn't have 700 yards rushing, then he was a terrible pick where we selected him. And yet it's an easy type of play. And in a full PPR league, if you have a guy who breaks out in that type of role, I mean, the flip side of it is that, I mean, similar to the Quentin Johnston situation, Jahan Dotson here goes at the 17-12. I do think it's obviously even more of a problem to be that bad in year 2, and he was catastrophically bad. You can put some of the blame on Sam Howell. You certainly can put a lot of the blame on Eric Bieniemy and the coaching staff. But similar to the blame you can parcel out for Quentin Johnston, the player is still responsible for figuring out a way to make it work. So we pass on Jahan Dotson a variety of times. He's almost free. Should there be a gap between Dotson and McCaffrey? Maybe. I kind of like the guy who hasn't already failed, even though with his background and with his draft slot, the rookie year projection for him isn't going to be pretty low, right? Having him in the lineup too many times this year would be a problem. If you state those types of things as givens, I think there's an argument for us to have taken a QB in that spot and taken a 4th QB with our final pick.
Yeah, I think there is the potential for that. It's going to be interesting on the draft board, like when this is over. Theo Johnson and Bellinger went off the board here since we last picked. Wide receivers mixed in as well, but Parham and Higbee, who we weren't really talking about, also off the board. So tight end really did squeeze us here a little bit, I think, in this particular draft. But the balance is going to be when we look back at who we could have taken at the certain spots of the draft. It may be a case that the options just weren't there when we were placed with the likes of a Raheem Mostert selection, or we're taking Stevenson over Firemouth and Goddard. The options may not have been available that would have made sense. So we'll see here as we have one more pick to go. Shawn, you mentioned not wanting Ertz. Obviously could potentially still be an option with the players that are potentially available. Running back Estime would be a name that's potentially going to be available here for us. And then we would look to quarterback. We have, the likes of Trey Lance, Joe Flacco, Jake Browning, players that you wouldn't really be expecting to have game time this season, barring injury, but they also would give a huge amount of upside as a potential play if those quarterbacks miss time or if anything happened with them. It's a really strange quandary here at the end with who it will actually be the Mr. Irrelevant, because obviously we had the 101. Anyone that you're considering here? What's the Galaxy brain plays to finish off the draft here?
Well, Estime is a very strong pick, as you mentioned. I think that Isaac Guerrero should be going in these drafts. I like him better than most of the players who have gone between rounds 17 and 20. I think that Tank Bigsby is someone who was getting way too much hype last year and is now faded too far out of the consciousness because he didn't live up to that hype. I think he should definitely be getting drafted in this format. Colm, do you have a QB name that you prefer when we look at the QB position? Penix, I don't think that he's really an option. He's the top guy by ADP, but Flacco, Winston, not somebody I draft for sort of off-field reasons, but then Jake Browning and Trey Lance, those guys aren't going very often. And so that might be an interesting play. It might make more sense to take a quarterback who is not going in these leagues than one who is. As we kind of work through that, Garendo and Bigsby did go. So I think those are excellent picks late. Estime still on the board. He doesn't get picked. He is there. This for me is probably Estime versus Trey Lance. But Jake Browning, Joe Flacco, I like those guys. I mean, Richardson sadly does have a very high likelihood of getting injured.
Yeah, those guys are only playing through injury, and the one that I think is most likely on, again, that's just based on last season, would be Lance, as you mentioned. So I think I'm between Flacco and Estime, unless you want to go and lock up the Washington tight end room. No strong lean here. You make the choice for overall structure. What should we do? Oh, I knew it. I knew that was going to be.
So we'll take Joe Flacco with the 2012 column. I almost clicked Estime. He's more likely to score points for us.
I really couldn't decide. I couldn't. I needed somebody to split the decision there.
Would you prefer to have Estime over either McCaffrey or Tolbert at the 18-19?
No, because I don't think that the issue for us really was, as you mentioned, the running back and wide receiver groupings. I think the issue was a fourth tight end or a third quarterback. And we really, again, you're basically back in the same situation where you're looking at, they're all backup quarterbacks in this range, but if we had passed on one of those guys, we could have potentially taken Howell. If Sam Darnold had taken 2 more picks, we could have potentially taken him. But I think that Sam Darnold has probably a chance to start the season. I don't think he finishes the season. So you're in, all these players are in half season kind of territory. So I'm okay with the Flacco pick. It was just trying to get those bits of the team to balance out. And I think maybe part of it is that I've mentioned, how I've been playing this contest is one of the kind of elite quarterbacks and then pushing it down into the kind of Derek Carr, Geno Smith, Daniel Jones kind of category of picks. And that's allowing you then to have, probably you're switching out that second quarterback pick for another tight end and that kind of opening 7 rounds. And that's freeing up those picks then for the Senate Gesicki pick, which probably opens up the door then for that additional, roster construction element of it with your quarterback and your tight ends kind of feeling a little bit better. But I have to say, in terms of wide receivers and running backs, I really love what we've done there. The opening to quarterbacks, realistically, if they do not perform or they get injured, this team is going to really struggle to write. But I do think we've done enough at wide receiver and running back to potentially fill that second flex spot if that was to happen. The area of difficulty is if we run into a situation where Sinat and Gesicki, don't perform and Trey McBride was to miss time, we really will have that dip at the tight end position. But you can't have all areas, really optimized. And I think that they're just two of the areas that are a little bit more tricky in this. And it feels like because we've taken our third quarterback as Joe Flacco, that maybe the quarterbacks aren't as strong as they could be, but I think they're extremely strong, and you'd be hoping that you wouldn't be relying on Flacco at any point. But he is the upside play if anything was to happen there to Anthony Richardson. How do you feel now looking at our team? So we have 3 quarterbacks in Hurts, Daniels, and Joe Flacco. Then at running back, we have Aaron Jones, Ramondre Stevenson, Mostert, Spears, Bucky Irving, J.K. Dobbins. Wide receiver, Ayuk, Smith, Allen, Reed, Judy, Johnson, Luke McCaffrey, and Jalen Tolbert. So that is 2, 4, 6, 8 wide receivers in this format, which we've kind of talked about. You don't need to be as deep at the wide receiver position, but I still think that's not a bad thing to have on the roster. So probably one wide receiver, I think maybe two more than we would normally go for here. And we probably would ideally have one more tight end. But what are your overall thoughts on the construction, first of all, in terms of the positions allocated per position?
Yeah, I think for me, it probably goes back to that pick in round 11, where I do wish we had taken a tight end, because I think if you have a tight end there, you're able to push the tight end in round 13 because we have Jaden Daniels. Maybe he comes back, and there's just, with the running back options that you probably are going to have, I don't know there's a need to take that fourth running back at that spot. Now, I really love Spears. I have a lot of him in situations where I need him to score, much more so even than I would on this particular team. I think getting that choice to select Estime in the very final pick, I already kind of regret that. I wish we had selected Estime. But with that option there, and with being able to get Irving and Dobbins at the 14-16, you just don't get blocked out at running back in this league. And having Aaron Jones, Ramondre Stevenson, and Raheem Mostert, I certainly understand why we passed. And I agree with you on kind of the Komet Musgrave situation and trying to get them at good prices. But certainly if you're on Musgrave as opposed to Tucker Kraft, which you mentioned that you are, I think I would be pretty excited about Kraft if not for the injury. And the injury shouldn't really cost him. It certainly shouldn't cost him playing time. But when you're the backup already, it starts to make me nervous when guys are potentially going to not be able to work out. They're maybe not going to be able to practice. You lose that ability to not even necessarily win the starting job, but to force a very clear timeshare. Now, where he is selected at the 16-10, I think Tucker Kraft is a great pick. But for me, that injury does kind of push that gap between Musgrave and Kraft to the point where I think Musgrave's undervalued. And so because he also was a good fit for us, I would have liked to have made that move. I think the kind of cascade effects for us as well are such that we should consider that. But the other element for me is that I kind of always forget when we get to this portion of the draft that some of the people that we have ranked really aggressively, like I have, well, I guess the ranking itself on Jatavian Sanders isn't that aggressive, but we've discussed him as being someone who could easily outperform his spot. I was hoping that he would come back to us at the 16-17 turn, and his ADP is in the middle of 17. He goes a few picks after we made the Quentin Johnston selection. That's kind of the other one I would like to have back, where if we take Sanders there instead of Quentin Johnston, I mean, number one, we didn't end up needing that receiver. Number two, we made the positive argument for Johnston. I do think he's a viable pick there. And yet, if there's no need to add a receiver who just had a terrible rookie year, then, why don't you make the other pick? And I mean, Sanders would have been a nice selection there. Just didn't necessarily realize the intensity of the need to go ahead and select him. So if we could redo those picks, I think I would like the team even more. But Colm, that's one of the things that you have to deal with a little bit when you're
I think they're
one of the very ends.
Yeah, I think they're.
But when you get to draft Jalen Hurts, I mean, you can't complain about the fact that a lot of guys are going to go in between. I mean, you got to start the draft by taking Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, I would very much agree with that as well. But I do think some of those picks are brought on by trying to, guess what's going to happen in the next 22 picks versus what's going to happen in the next, 12. So if you are picking in the 4 spot, 5 spot, 6 spot, there is, opportunities to see how it's playing out a little bit more. So that's even at that Spears pick, and I agree in hindsight, taking the tight end there would have freed us up a lot over those last 6 or 7 rounds in terms of what we wanted to do or what we needed to do. Like if we passed on Sinat, we could have at that point taken a Jaden Wright, Jerome Ford. You mentioned Jaleel McLaughlin during the draft. There's those options of changing it up. At the time, I felt that the 2 running backs was the right call based on how we had started and, the kind of little bit of an edge towards running back in this format. And I also did think that one of those two tight ends would come back. But that's always the risk of trying to do that. But then when we made that pick, I remember during the draft saying that I was even happier with that, because then there was a run at that point of 8 consecutive running backs to start that round after we took Spears. So we couldn't have envisioned that happening. But then looking back and with the draft done and, doing the jigsaw pieces of moving one player out and moving one player in, I think like if we take the tight end there and we miss out on Spears and then we get Bucky Irvin, J.K. Dobbins, like obviously that last pick, then you're hoping that you go and get Estime, but the draft then shakes out different and Estime goes, with the 2007, then we're wondering why we passed up on Tajay Spears. So it can be challenging that way, but I agree having one of those guys on the roster would have been much better. And I feel like they are the two pivot points of where things could have changed. And the Sanders pick would have been nice, but I think that if you had Musgrave or Komet over Spears and then skipped on Sanat for, let's say, the other part with the Jalen Wright pick, that I wasn't as desperate to have him on the roster as we did have Raheem Mostert, which kind of lent me away from him a little bit as well. But I agree, Shawn, with what you said. So you can just blame me. Those.
I think a Nick Chubb selection there would have also been very interesting. I think, as you mentioned, McLaughlin, Wright was somebody we wouldn't have actually picked because
that was a group I was going to ask you about the ADP during it. Is Ford and Chubb's ADPs right beside each other? Ford went to the 13-2, Chubb went to the 13-11. We haven't really talked that much about either of those guys, but obviously Chubb's coming back from a very serious injury. But it also feels like if, we get to the midpoint of the season and he's healthy, that this is a massively discounted price for Nick Chubb, who, in regular formats, non-Superflex, has consistently been like a kind of 2-3 turn kind of player.
Yeah, and so I think the inability to really read that is putting his price where it is. There are a lot of people who believe that he won't be able to make much of an impact all season.
Yeah.
And that is keeping him down where he is. My thought would be just that it's very difficult to know. And the decisions that the Browns have made suggest that they think he'll be able to contribute at some point. And when you are looking at Ford and Chubb side by side, Ford was good last year. I think he's an undervalued talent, and yet you prefer to have the points at the end than at the beginning. I think even in a situation where one guy scores 2/3 and the other player only 1/3, you would prefer to have the points at the end in this type of a construction, right? Jerome Ford is the guy you want when you're in a slightly different type of format and you're very zero RB and you need some early season points to balance out maybe a Jonathan Brooks or a Trey Benson, some guys that you expect to blow up, but you don't know when you're going to be able to count on them. In those environments, I think that Ford is a really strong pick because I do expect him to score a bunch of points in the first half of the season. He's a strong pick more or less regardless, but I think especially in that type of dynamic. So Ford, a good pick. Chubb, just always such an interesting pick. I did want to kind of mention the other little reason that we weren't looking at Sanders at the 14-15 turn is simply that he had the same buy as Trey McBride, which is something we dealt with a little bit in the first draft. We did have another tight end there, but all else being equal, unless we got a good price on Sanders, I did want a third different buy at the tight end position. Colm, what are some other teams that jump out to you here?
I think there's a number of teams, Shawn, with very interesting, overall lineups. One, Sam in spot 7, I think is quite interesting, just the way that it was built out. That's a Tyreek Hill Tua team, and it's an Aaron Rodgers, Garrett Wilson team. Kyron Williams at running back paired with Swift, Devin Singletary, Ty Chandler, and Elijah Mitchell. Does have some questions as we talked throughout the draft at tight end with Schultz, Okonkwo, and Bellinger. But I think it's an overall interesting roster. I think there's a number of teams that have a bit like us, there's very strong points of rosters, but the building out the entire process gets very challenging in this particular draft room. The drafter that I mentioned that was getting a lot of early values at the start, that was the happy birthday achievers. That's Breece Hall, in the first pick, Jamar Chase got a very heavily discounted by a round. Brock Purdy, Jonathan Taylor discounted by a round. I think that pairing of Jonathan Taylor and Breece Hall is very interesting. Then DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, Cortland Sutton, Gabe Davis, Ricky Pearsall, Jalen McMillan, Darius Slayton. So I think wide receiver tails off quite a bit. But I thought their opening stanza to the draft was interesting. They do have Jalen Warren, Kendry Miller, Nick Chubb, and Khalil Herbert along with those running backs. So very strong at running back. Deshaun Watson, Bo Nix, and Brock Purdy at quarterback. So another kind of interesting team. But I think when I look through all the rosters, Shawn, there's bits and pieces where we've all been kind of challenged throughout this draft to try and build it out. But the Mr. Banana Grabber in 3 is probably one of my favorite overall rosters. And that's a Mahomes love team, but it's a wide receiver, Jalen Waddle, Deebo Samuel, T. Higgins, Worthy, Christian Watson, and Jameson Williams at wide receiver. They grab those 6 wide receivers through 10 rounds, and then they don't draft another wide receiver throughout the rest of the draft to give their running backs David Montgomery, Javonte Williams, Marshawn Lloyd, Jalen Wright, Ray Davis, Tyrone Tracy, Tank Bigsby, a number of those players, Shawn, that we talked about throughout the draft. And then it's Travis Kelce with Patrick Mahomes, but that's paired up then with likely Tucker Kraft and Theo Johnson as their tight end. Sam Darnold is the additional tight end then later on in the 18th round to go along with Mahomes and Love. So I think that the way that they've combined that roster together with the stacks, with the roster construction, with the players they've added, and with the amount of players they grabbed, as we were hoping they would make it 2 more picks before us, I think that team in 3 is a very, very nice roster once we have the draft finished and look at the draft board. Is that team or any other team standing out for you?
It's always fascinating to look through the different ways that teams approached it. And when you go into a draft like this and the ADP environment is going to be unusual, one of the things that you can do is sort of set yourself up to take advantage of that. And Tim, out of the 10 spot, gets a big ADP discount on Justin Herbert in round 5, takes the big ADP discounts on both Josh Jacobs and Joe Mixon. That was something we discussed where we would feel comfortable taking those guys and thought that both of those were good picks. They actually go to the same roster. It also takes the big ADP discount on Austin Eckler in round 14. I think there's a lot of reason to be skeptical about what Eckler can do this season, but in round 14, you are getting that scenario at a very good price. That's also a team that has both Hawkinson and Kmet together. And I think that if you don't have the early tight end because you've taken some of those discounts after doing the recommended running back wide receiver start out of the slot 10, then rounding out your team or taking those mid-round values on Hawkinson and Kmet, which I think are 2 of the best tight end values in this entire draft, that team looks very this kind of a mixture of dynamic and simultaneously the ADP values that when we look at this at mid-season, if some of those people hit, then certainly there are going to be questions about how do you get them all onto this team like Tim did. The team in 9, Jeff there takes the very aggressive approach of going with both Anthony Richardson and Kyler Murray. If you're going to do the QB, I like getting 2 hybrid players where you don't necessarily need to do a lot with their receivers. Now, he does go ahead and take Mitchell and Josh Downs on that team in rounds 13 and 14 because there are good prices on those guys. But that's a fun team, the way that's put together. If they both stay healthy, that team will score a ton of points at both the QB and the Superflex spots. The value on Saquon Barkley is something that we think is kind of controversial. It's also an interesting team in that this was one of 2 teams that were actually able to get 2 early tight ends. Ingram and Ferguson are not necessarily our player targets. And yet one of the things you have to do in this type of room is maybe go against the grain a little bit, select some of those guys who are at least slightly less fashionable. Evan Ingram, somebody I took in the MFL 10 of death, especially in a tight end premium format with the number of routes that Evan Ingram is going to get, with the number of targets that he likely gets, even though they've added in Brian Thomas, they've added in Gabe Davis. Ingram could end up as the overall tight end 1. I love that play. And then this wasn't a team who was able to get a single receiver until round 7, but then they take, I believe, 8 consecutive guys and 9 receivers and 10 picks. That's a good understanding of how you need to balance that. And then getting the 4 running backs in the final 4 rounds and deciding not to take a third QB to go all in on those guys you picked in rounds 1 and 2. That's a strong way to play at the other team. Besides, or the other 2 teams, I should say, besides ourselves, who went QB, we get out of the 8th slot this Lamar Jackson and Dak Prescott. Those 2 players have pretty obscene upsides. And then for number 3, to get Patrick Mahomes and then get Jordan Love. Love is a little bit tricky for me because some of the things that he did over the second half of last season, I think that defenses will adjust to. But as you also look at the fantasy playoffs, I shouldn't say the fantasy playoffs. What I meant there is the reality playoffs and how they were continuing to rise. Jordan Love, a guy who doesn't have the same hybrid ability as some of those players drafted in the first round, and yet he adds enough that he goes off for a Patrick Mahomes type of passing season, and suddenly you're looking at him as the clear QB1 in the whole thing. I think if you're going to go QB, you have to feel like both of your quarterbacks have a chance to finish as the overall QB1. That's what you get out of number 3. It's what we were trying to do out of the number 1 slot. And certainly the fact that those 4 teams that went QB then were very light on quarterbacks for the entire rest of the draft. Colm, that's something where I think all 4 teams executed that part of it nicely.
Yeah, and I think overall, again, harkening back to this contest and, what the tight end premium, what the Superflex, what the PPR element to it, it just gives you a different variety of ways to try and attack it. And, we can talk about drafting 1 quarterback and then, in the first round, and then trying to hold off to get one of those other guys quite a bit later in the kind of 6, 7, 8 range. But there's so many ways then in between what you do with your tight end, what you do with the running back position, what you do with the wide receiver position, and how you build it out. And you can see throughout this entire draft all the different elements that are very interesting and intriguing on these rosters, and just shows the different ways that you can look to attack this contest, which makes it absolutely so much fun. So if you are interested in playing it, is over at the FFPC. Their website is myffpc.com. It's a $35 entry, $100,000 to first place top prize. Hopefully people have enjoyed listening into this draft. It was against the RotoViz OT community, against listeners to the podcast. We love doing these. We will have more coming up. We've had lots of interest in it. So if you are interested in drafting against myself and Shawn, get in touch on Twitter at Overtime Ireland or email across at rotovizradio@gmail.com. We'll try and do some more before the start of the season. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter. And of course, check out all of Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com. If you're signing up over at rotoviz.com, you get access to all of the content and tools. If you use the code RVRadio2024 at checkout, you'll save yourself 10% off that discount. But thank you very much for listening in. And until we are back, have a good one.